guys, Andy Forrestine Runner here, and today I'm delighted to be comparing the New Balance 1080 version 10 against the New Balance Beacon version 2. So we've got two very similar looking New Balance running shoes here, but two very different price points. We've got the 1080 version 10, which is on sale now for around about £115 to £125, but the Beacon version 2 I've seen for under £80. So the big question that I will hope to answer for you guys today, is there a massive difference in performance, and is it worth paying the extra money for the 1080 version 10? Today I'm going to be going through with you guys my pros and cons on both of these shoes, and of course my final thoughts at the end. So if you're excited for today's video, guys, make sure you give it a like, share it with your friends, subscribe to the channel for weekly running content, and without further ado, let's dive in. So as always with these shoe comparison videos, we'll go through a very quick technical, but not very technical, overview of both these shoes before we jump in to my pros and cons. I'm not going to go into great detail today. There are three things that I want to highlight technically from these two shoes, which will then lead on into the pros and cons. But of course, if you want to know more about these shoes and you're new to looking at them, both of my first impression videos of these shoes are on the channel. You can go search them up and they have full technical overviews there. But as I said, there are three things that I want to highlight with you guys today about these two shoes that are the main difference between these very similar looking shoes, and that is the weight, that is the upper, and that is the midsole. I'm going to use the 1080 version 10 as an example because they both look exactly the same. Both of these shoes incorporate a heel flare here with a nice sturdy but very thin heel counter. Both of them slightly different cushioning in the Beacon, but very, very similar in my opinion, which then connects here and a little bit further down here on the Beacon version 2 to a one-piece mesh upper on both of the shoes, which then just runs straight in to a one solid midsole piece of fresh foam in the Beacon version 2 and fresh foam X in the New Balance 1080 version 10. Both very simple but very effective shoes. However, straight off the bat, I do prefer the 1080 version 10. We'll go with that in the pros and cons. Let me tell you for the reasons that I want to highlight. The weight. There is a bigger weight difference in this 1080 version 10. This is a much lighter shoe, the Beacon version 2, which I do prefer. That is a big pro for the Beacon version 2. And the weight, I think, comes from the fact that the Beacon version 2 has very limited outsole rubber, literally just a few pods here and there scattered onto high wearing areas onto the Beacon version 2, whereas on the 1080 version 10, as you can see, we have much more outsole rubber that has been placed on the midsole there. We've got a big red chunk here. We also, you can't see it, but a cream coloured piece covering there, so we only have a tiny bit in the middle there of exposed fresh foam X. So that's of course going to be adding on some weight, and the other area that I think is adding on the weight is the engineered mesh upper. This upper is far better than this upper, but I have to stress it does add weight. Now I apologise in advance, I don't have the exact measurements. I believe I gave them in both first impressions video, but from memory, this thing for me in a UK size 13.5 is around about 12 ounces. 340-ish grams, somewhere around there, and this is more down around the 10 ounces. So there is a big difference between the two shoes, and that is certainly a big pro going in for the Beacon version 2. We'll cover that shortly. So the weight is one thing I wanted to cover. The upper is the next. A much better upper, and I'll give you my reason as to why I believe this is a better upper than the Beacon version 2. There are two reasons. It's much more stretchy, so it molds to my foot a heck of a lot better. I get much more of a lockdown feel in this shoe. I do feel like a little bit of a sloppy fit in the Beacon version 2. My feet at the top ends do just kind of feel like there's not a lot of material around. It does bunch up. As you can see here, it's already bunched up there. It's not stretchy in the slightest, whereas this thing with its stretch in the material is so much nicer. That coupled with the fact that this thing has a gusseted tongue and this thing doesn't, that's another point to note. It just adds to that extra lockdown feel in the midsole and foot area. But to be honest with you, it does add weight, so it's a little bit of a negative for the 1080 version 10. But the final thing And the biggest difference between the two shoes, in my opinion, is the midsole. Fresh foam is used in the V2. Fresh Foam X is used in the 1080 version 10. This for me is a much better midsole than this. I did struggle with the Beacon V2. I have retired it early. I've got about 150 miles in the shoe. I just couldn't get on with it. I remember doing a long run in it. My feet were absolutely killing me. It just felt like I was running on rocks. It was such a hard midsole. And as much as I loved every other aspect of the shoe, and I cannot wait for the Beacon version 3 to come out later this year, which I will be grabbing a pair of because it does have Fresh Foam X, and the upper combined with Fresh Foam X will be a dream shoe. The midsole for me was just not good enough. Whereas the Fresh Foam X is just a little bit softer, a little bit more responsive. Again, I think there's some added weight in there, but overall it's so much of a better midsole than the original Fresh Foam. So that, guys, is for me the three main differences from a technical perspective between these shoes. So let's get down to the nitty gritty. Let's jump into the pros and cons of both of these shoes. I've been talking a lot about the 1080 version 10, so I'll focus a little bit more on the Beacon version 2 now. As I alluded to just then, I have run about 150 miles in the shoe. I did retire it early because sadly I just could not get on with the midsole. But everything about this shoe has potential for me. I know there's loads of you out there that absolutely love the Beacon. It is just one of the best daily trainers that came out in 2019. And I have to agree with you, it is an absolutely fantastic shoe. But for me, sadly, I just didn't quite get on with the midsole. I'm one of those guys that just prefers a slightly softer, more responsive midsole. If you've seen my Asics Nova Blast first impressions video, you know exactly what I mean. The softer, more responsive cushion midsole, the better for me. I'm not a big fan of these firmer midsoles, only in a racing environment like in the Carbon X, but not for daily training. I want something a little bit softer on the legs. And for that reason, I did retire that early. As I said, I did do a big old long run in this in 2.5 hours. It absolutely crippled me. I felt the effects for days afterwards. My feet were burning. This thing, I did a great long run in it, absolutely no problems whatsoever. So there was a massive, massive difference in the midsole. And that's going to be a question I ask you at the end when we get to the price point. And for me, the other main benefit of the 1080 version 10 against the Beacon version 2, as I said before, is the fact that the upper in this is just a little bit sloppy. It's just something and nothing in this shoe. It's not, having had the stretchiness of the 1080 version 10, it just puts this to shame. I didn't notice it so much when I was running in this before I had this, but now I'm using the 1080 version 10, I realise how much better support I get in this shoe. I've got to be careful what I say there. It's not a supportive shoe, but I do feel like my foot is far more supported in the 1080 version 10 compared to the Beacon version 2. Overall, my thoughts on both of these shoes are the fact that I am loving the 1080 version 10 a lot more. It took me about 50 miles to warm up into the Beacon. I then got about 75 miles out of decent mileage, I'd say, out of this shoe, running between the 5 and 8 mile range. And I was loving it. That was its sweet spot. But then I just couldn't. I was trying other shoes, and I realised just how firm the midsole was, and it suddenly became a shoe that I would reach for every run, to a shoe that I was back of the pack, to be perfectly honest with you. Whereas the 1080 version 10, sadly, it's coming along at the same time as the Nova Blast, which is absolutely amazing, but it's still an absolute privilege to have this and the Nova Blast in my daily training rotation. And for me, I just feel this shoe is a little bit more versatile than the Beacon. For this, I was literally grabbing it for any run within that 5 to 8 mile range. For this, I'll grab it for anywhere from 5 miles up to a long run. I really enjoyed my long run in this shoe. It was an absolutely fantastic shoe, and I would pick it again and again and again for a long run. So again, I just feel it's a little bit more versatile. This thing I would certainly prefer to do speed work in. It is lighter, it's more nimble, and with the Beacon version 3, I would certainly be using that shoe for things like mile repeats, kilometre repeats, intervals, over something like the 1080 version 10. But for me, this just covers a little bit more of my running, and I can get a little bit more use out of it than the Beacon version 2. So to the burning question, there is a big old price difference between the two, but is it worth it? This is all down to personal preference, obviously, and for me personally, I'm going to say yes. For me, I would spend a little bit more money to get the 1080 version 10 over the Beacon version 2. However, there is a big caveat with that. If you can get this shoe for under £80, which I know you can because I've seen it on offer for around £50 or £60, then I would not hesitate but to snap this thing up, because for that you can get 2 of these for the price of that. So at that price, I wouldn't hesitate. But at currently retail price 80, 125, I would choose the 1080 version 10. Again, it's personal preference. I'm not advising you guys to choose the 1080 version 10, but it's just a shoe that I've worn to a heck of a lot more than I did the Beacon version 2, and a shoe that I'm gravitating towards a little bit more, which is a bit sad because I know this shoe had so much hype over it, but I'm really hoping that with the release of the Beacon version 3 later this year, it's going to be a little bit more revolutionary. Then I can sit back down, compare this to the V3, and hopefully the V3 will blow this thing out of the water. Anyway, that's it for the video today, guys. Let me know in the comments below, have you run in the Beacon version 2 or the 1080 version 10? And what are your thoughts? Let me know which one you prefer and which one you go with. Would you pay the extra money for the 1080 version 10, or would you stick with the Beacon version 2? If you enjoyed the video, guys, please do make sure you give it a like, share it with your friends, and do consider subscribing to the channel for weekly running content. And as always, I'll see you on the next one. Until then.